Shortly before 2 a.m. on April 1st, 2006, Randall Shaffer stepped back inside a crowded bar in Columbus, Ohio. He was not seen again. Surveillance cameras continue recording for hours afterward, capturing patrons as they entered and as they left. Randall Shaffer does not appear on this footage again. At the time, nothing about the night suggested it would be remembered. It followed a rhythm familiar to millions. Conversation carried over music, crowded rooms, the quiet elasticity of time that often accompanies the early hours of morning. There was no visible marker separating that night from any other. And yet, it would become the last confirmed parameter of Randall Shaffer's life. Randall Shaffer was a 27-year-old, a second-year medical student at the Ohio State University. Those who knew him described someone dependable, intelligent, and easy in conversation. He played guitar. He kept close friendships. His future appeared structured and firmly underway. Weeks later, he was expected to travel to Miami with his girlfriend. Plans existed. Commitments existed. The forward motion of an ordinary life was intact. Nothing in this visible architecture of Brian's world suggested disappearance. On the evening of March 31st, he met his father for dinner. The meal was unremarkable by all available accounts. A simple meeting between parents and son at the edge of spring. Afterward, Brian joined a friend to mark the beginning of spring break. The night progressed without recorded disturbance. They moved between establishments before arriving at the Outlet Tuna Saloon, a popular bar near campus, situated within a mixed-use complex. Security footage later confirmed their arrival shortly after 1:15 in the morning. Inside, the environment was typical for the hour. Music elevated above conversation. Shifting light across crowded floors. The subtle disorientation common to spaces designed for temporary escape from routine. Nothing within the setting distinguished Brian from the hundreds of others present that night. For a time, he remained with his friend. Shortly before closing, Brian was seen near the escalator outside the bar, speaking briefly with two women. The exchange appeared casual. There was no visible urgency, no sign of distress. This occurred at approximately 1:55 a.m. The verified footage shows him leaving. When the bar closed, the separation did not immediately register as unusual. In crowded environments, brief absences are common. It is easy to assume that someone has stepped outside, continue elsewhere, or accepted a ride without notice. Calls to Brian's phone began soon after. They went unanswered. At first, this suggested little. Phones are silenced. Batteries fail. Nights extend longer than intended. Morning, however, tends to restore order. By morning, Brian had not returned home. Friends who understood his habits began to sense a misalignment. Difficult to articulate, but equally difficult to dismiss. His absence did not behave like him. Concern replaced assumption. Attempts to reach him continued. The calls went directly to voicemail. Days passed. Brian did not board his scheduled flight to Miami. For those closest to him, the missed departure marked a quiet but irreversible transition from expectation to alarm. Investigators began reconstructing the night through mechanisms available to modern inquiry: surveillance recordings, transaction histories, interviews, spatial analysis. The footage from the ugly tuna was viewed repeatedly. Patrons could be seen entering. Others were clearly recorded leaving. Brian remained visible only within a narrow window. Arriving, conversing, stepping briefly outside, then turning back toward the interior. Beyond that point, the record does not follow. The building contained a service exit. It was considered. Deliveries had moved through it earlier in the evening. Yet no conclusive evidence placed Brian at that threshold. His vehicle remained parked nearby. Inside his apartment, nothing appeared disturbed. There was no indications of preparation, no suggestion of voluntary departure, no message that clarified intent. Accounts of unexplained disappearances are not uncommon within the ledger. Still, each carries its own parameter, a final geography where the known world ends. For Brian Shaffer, that parameter is remarkably narrow. A doorway, a camera, a turn back into a crowded room, and then absence. Search efforts expanded. Volunteers walked nearby streets. Authorities pursued leads as they emerged and dissolved. Interviews layered memory upon memory, each shaped by the natural erosion of time. No confirmed trace extended Brian's path beyond the early morning. It is often assumed that modern life is inherently traceable. That movement generates record. That presence leaves pattern. Yet, On rare occasions, a person passes through a densely populated space and fails to emerge in any verifiable direction. For those who knew him, the question was not only where Brian had gone, but how departure itself could remain unobserved. Time continued forward. Seasons altered the landscape. New students arrived. The ordinary architecture of the city adjusted without ceremony. But the last confirmed image did not change. A young man turning back toward a crowded bar. Motion without continuation. A life proceeding until it wasn't. Brian Shaffer remains missing. No verified account has established his movements beyond that night. His account endures here, held in record, so that the boundary where he was last known is not surrendered to silence. Within the ledger, such moments are preserved, not to resolve them, but to ensure they remain visible against the passage of time. What is recorded remains. The record remembers.